There is a mystery as to why some people seem completely unperturbed in the face of life's trials. It is as if chaos, insults, frustrations, and failures simply do not touch them, as if they are beyond the reach of the storm. What is this secret that they possess that remains inaccessible to many? Most people live their lives in constant reaction to external stimuli. An unexpected change of lane on the road causes a burst of anger. Unpleasant remarks from a colleague instantly ruin the mood. A random glance from a stranger gives rise to self-doubt. But imagine being free of this dependence on external factors. What if no person, no situation, no external force could influence your inner state? Carl Jung argued that many people are hostages of their own reactions. They feel as if the world is causing them suffering, when in fact they are simply reflecting their own inner conflicts and shortcomings. And here's the truth: nothing can hurt you unless it finds a vulnerable spot in you. If someone's words, such as insult, make you angry, it may be a sign that deep down you fear there is some truth to those words. If being ignored by another person hurts, it may be an indication that you still need external validation of your worth. Different people can perceive identical circumstances in completely different ways, because it is not the situation itself that plays the key role, but the internal state of the person. Carl Jung called this shadow work, the process of becoming aware of the unconscious, understanding that every irritation, disappointment, or emotional trigger is an internal signal. Many people prefer to avoid these triggers, trying to drown them out, ignore them, or blame the outside world for their feelings, but those who have embarked on the path of self-knowledge discover that the external world only reflects their internal state. Understanding this fact opens up the possibility of managing your reality by controlling yourself. However, as practice shows, not everyone is ready to accept this idea. It is much easier to blame your bosses, former partners, circumstances, or even bad luck for your problems than to admit that it is the person who gives power to everything that influences him. Recognizing one's own responsibility requires courage and a willingness to change, while blaming external factors allows one to maintain the illusion of control and avoid the need to change. For those brave souls who are willing to look deep into their souls, who dare to stop looking for someone to blame and begin to observe carefully, a completely new horizon of freedom opens up. And here's the amazing thing: as soon as a person stops reacting automatically, he is freed from someone else's control. There is no longer any need to avoid unpleasant personalities or frantically try to control circumstances. He becomes invulnerable, not detached and unfeeling, and completely inaccessible to external manipulation. This is the paradox, the illusion of control versus the freedom of letting go. Most of humanity spends its life trying to control something it was never meant to control. People crave recognition, strive for predictability, dream of everything going according to a predetermined plan. And when reality does not match their expectations, they suffer. They get angry when they are not given the respect they deserve, they feel cheated when life deviates from their script, they take everything too personally, as if the universe has chosen them as a subject for cruel tests. But the truth is that nothing in this world is subject to human control, with one important exception: perceptions. Carl Jung, the insightful psychologist, realized what eludes most people. The world around us is neutral, it is neither good nor evil, neither benevolent nor cruel. It simply exists as it is. And only personal perception, this unique filter through which everyone looks at the world, colors it in positive or negative tones. Picture this: two people are faced with an identical life challenge, be it a painful breakup, financial ruin, or professional failure. One of them breaks under the weight of the circumstances, sinking into despair and self-destruction, convinced of the ultimate loss of everything. The other, on the contrary, sees in this challenge a valuable lesson, an incentive for personal growth, and a springboard to new, higher achievements. The key difference lies in their individual perceptions of the situation. As Carl Jung once astutely noted, until a person becomes aware of the contents of his unconscious, it will invisibly control his life, and he will mistake this control for a predetermined destiny. In other words, until an individual becomes aware of the deep stories and beliefs he subconsciously transmits to himself about other people, about the nature of success, and about his own worth, he will continue to react blindly to external circumstances, mistakenly believing that life is something that happens to him rather than unfolding through his own actions and decisions. This is where things get interesting. The more desperately a person tries to control the external world around him, the more power he unwittingly gives that world over himself. At the very moment when an individual desperately needs someone's respect, that other person gains enormous power over him. As soon as there is an urgent need for a situation to develop in a strictly defined way, this situation begins to control the person. And finally, when an irresistible desire for life to be fair appears, the individual dooms himself to inevitable disappointment, since reality does not always correspond to this idealized idea. However, as soon as a person gives up the obsessive idea of keeping everything under control, an amazing transformation occurs, true freedom sets in, there is no longer a need for constant approval from others, the paralyzing fear of possible failures disappears, the exhausting struggle for the world to correspond to personal ideas ceases. It is worth thinking about. Truly strong and self-confident individuals are not those who try to control every little thing, but those who have self-control, who are able to keep cool in the most difficult moments, remain unperturbed in the face of chaos, not pay attention to offensive words and not be afraid of the unknown. They have comprehended the truth, inaccessible to most, control is just an illusion, and as soon as a person stops striving for this illusory goal, he gains real power. This is the paradox. When the urgent need for everything to happen according to the planned scenario disappears, the desired often comes true by itself. When a person stops being afraid of judgment from others, he naturally becomes more self-confident. When the desperate pursuit of success ceases, opportunities begin to appear as if by themselves, without any effort. When a person stops resisting the flow of life and starts going with the flow, everything around them seems to magically fall into perfect order. This statement goes beyond philosophical reflections and is based on neuroscience. Cognitive psychology shows that excessive desire for control over people, circumstances, or even one's own thoughts creates resistance. It is no coincidence that those who desperately desire love often push it away, and those who fear failure subconsciously sabotage their efforts. Paradoxically, it is precisely those who cling most tightly to control who often feel most helpless. So it is important to ask whether one is merely a passive observer, reacting to life circumstances, or whether one is able to actively shape one's perceptions. Once you realize that external factors have no power over your inner world, life appears in a completely different light. It is about developing an inviolable mind that can remain unperturbed in the face of any challenge. Let's imagine a situation where a person is calmly walking down the street, lost in his thoughts. Suddenly someone shouts an insult, for example, calling him an idiot or predicting failure. It is important to stop for a moment and analyze what is happening inside at that moment. Often, when faced with criticism or attacks, a person involuntarily stands up for his interests or goes into deep resentment. Emotions overwhelm his mind, preventing him from assessing the situation soberly. His heart starts beating faster, anger boils in his blood, and his mind plays the hurtful words over and over again, only increasing the feeling of annoyance. But let's imagine a completely different reaction, a complete lack of any reaction. No emotional outburst, just a calm awareness that, this has nothing to do with me. This is the state that the Stoics, Zen masters, and even the famous psychologist Carl Jung strove for, claiming that nothing external can throw a person off balance unless he allows it. But why do most people succumb so easily to other people's influence? The reason lies in the false I, a fragile construct created on the basis of other people's opinions, the desire for external approval, and a painful attachment to the result. That is why they react so sharply to any attacks, perceiving them not just as an insult, but as a direct threat to their identity. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow self, the hidden part of our psyche where all our fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotional wounds are hidden. When someone touches us on the raw, they do not cause us new pain, but only expose the one that has long been there. If a man were in harmony with himself, an insult hurled by a stranger would have no effect on him. It would be like shouting at an inaccessible mountain. The echo would return, but the mountain would remain motionless. The real question is the origin of emotional reactions. Does an insult cause resentment because of a fear of one's own inadequacy? Does anger provoke disrespect from others, caused by an internal need for universal recognition? Do deviations from the intended plan lead to a loss of self-control due to excessive attachment to a specific result? The essence of the problem lies not in external circumstances, but in the subjective perception of oneself. True strength lies not in the desire to suppress the external world, avoid criticism, or eliminate problems. It manifests itself in the formation of an imperturbable mind that does not need external confirmation, is resistant to life's adversities, and is aware that control begins with managing one's own perception. This is not just philosophical reasoning, but a scientifically based approach to psychological preparation. Research shows that emotional reactivity is formed as a habit. The brain develops neural connections that strengthen certain reactions. The more a person allows external factors to influence their emotions, the more automatic these reactions become. However, there is also positive information. The brain has an amazing ability to restructure. Modern neurobiological research confirms that through mindfulness practices, cognitive reappraisal techniques, and deliberate exposure to uncomfortable situations, each person can purposefully train their brain to become less sensitive to external stimuli. Over time, hurtful remarks lose their bite, failures cease to be perceived as defining factors of personality, and uncertainty no longer causes fear and anxiety. A person gains a kind of invulnerability, not through changes in the outside world, but through the transformation of the internal state. There is an interesting pattern in human psychology. People often believe that their reactions are caused by external circumstances, when in fact they are reacting to their own interpretations of those circumstances. When a person is confronted with an insult, words cut like a sharp blade. But if you stop for a moment and listen to yourself, you will discover that the pain is not in the words themselves, but in the meaning that the mind gives them, in the hidden emotional wounds that they touch, in the subconscious stories that a person unconsciously carries through the years. The eminent psychologist Carl Jung understood this connection deeply. He argued that everything that irritates others can become a valuable key to deeper self-knowledge. This is a harsh truth that many choose to ignore. Nothing from outside has power over a person unless he allows it to happen. Imagine a mirror surface. If your reflection in it suddenly distorted into a grimace of discontent, would you be angry at the innocent glass? Of course not. You would realize that it only truthfully reflects your own state. However, when life circumstances, like a mirror, reflect our inner experiences, when the people around us cause a storm of emotions in us, we, unfortunately, tend to react as if the reflection itself is to blame. We point our fingers, demanding changes from others, instead of realizing the simple truth. The external world is just an echo of our inner cosmos. But the natural question arises, why do we give such enormous power to what is outside our I? The reason lies in our eternal weakness, attachment. If your identity is inextricably linked to the opinions of others, you inevitably become a slave to their approval, dependent on the praise of others, like a puppet pulled by strings. If it is tied to achieving a specific result, you risk becoming a victim of unexpected turns of fate, like a ship abandoned to the mercy of the elements. And if it depends on external circumstances, you will forever remain at the mercy of the whims of fortune, like a leaf blown by the wind. But what if you dared to step out of this vicious game? What if, instead of reacting blindly, you became an impartial observer, a detached contemplator? Detachment is not insensitivity at all, but rather a state of invulnerability, where nothing can touch you. It is the realization that you are not your emotions, not your fleeting experiences, but the consciousness that observes them, like a wise old man looking down on the world from the heights of his years. Think of the elements, the thunderstorm that bursts forth in all its splendor. Thunder shakes the earth, lightning pierces the sky, the wind howls like a wounded animal. But high above this chaos, the sky remains calm, clear and serene. Well, you are this sky, not the storm raging below. You are eternity watching the passing. The true power of man lies not in the power over the surrounding world, but in the control of his own perception of this world. When an individual stops reacting impulsively to external stimuli, he begins to control reality itself. Those around him sense this, they lose the ability to shake his confidence, manipulate him or influence his inner world, because he becomes the absolute master of his energy. How can one achieve a state of inner integrity? The key to this lies in a radical change in consciousness, in the realization that a person does not react to the world as such, but to the interpretation that his mind creates on the basis of what he perceives. An example is the situation when two people, being in identical circumstances, experience completely different emotions. For example, if someone accidentally bumps into someone on the street, one may simply walk by without paying attention, while another will take it as a personal insult and experience anger for a long time. The event is the same, but the reaction to it is diametrically opposed. This is because the reaction is not due to the event itself, but to how the mind interprets it. Renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of the human psyche that harbors suppressed desires, unhealed wounds, and rejected emotions. It is these hidden elements that, paradoxically, have the greatest influence on human behavior. What is the reason for our violent reactions to certain words or the irritating influence of certain personalities? The answer is simple. They touch upon those aspects of our personality that are not yet fully understood and accepted. When someone easily manipulates our feelings, it is evidence that they hold the key to a part of ourselves over which we have no complete control. However, the secret to achieving steadfastness is not in suppressing emotions, but in fully acknowledging them and depriving them of their power over us. Instead of fighting your emotional triggers, you should examine them carefully. Instead of blaming others for causing you to feel this way, you should ask yourself, what part of my personality is showing right now? Think of a chessboard. Most people live their lives like chess pieces, reacting to each move of their opponent and becoming completely immersed in the game. But true mastery lies in becoming a player who can see the entire chess game. An even higher level is to become an observer who watches the game from the outside, anticipating all the moves before they are made. This is emotional detachment. Emotional detachment is not insensitivity, but a deep understanding of one's emotions, allowing them to no longer control us. A person becomes an observer, not a prisoner of one's own reactions. It is truly amazing how the world around is transformed when a person stops reacting mechanically to external stimuli. Those around you intuitively sense this change in energy. Once the individual no longer seeks approval, others begin to seek his favor. Negative influences lose their power when they do not meet with a response. A person stops being a puppet in the hands of circumstances and begins to determine the course of events himself. The main condition is awareness at every moment of time. In any situation, a person has a choice: to give in to an impulsive reaction or consciously observe what is happening. When someone is trying to upset you, it is important to catch yourself before you let your feelings get the better of you. You need to feel the wave of irritation rising, but instead of acting on it, you need to step back and observe your feelings like a scientist studying an experiment. That is where the power lies. The question is how to develop this ability to the point of automatism. This will be discussed later. When a person stops allowing the world to manipulate him, he regains control over his reactions and becomes the master of his destiny. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, Flow of Thoughts, and turn on notifications so you don't miss new helpful videos.